Once, the Vikings ruled the seas, and their gods ruled their world. Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki shaped the beliefs, laws, and identity of an entire civilization. But today, that ancient religion has vanished. How did it end? What changed? And why do modern people no longer worship these gods? Today, we will uncover the two versions of Norse mythology, the pre-Christian and post-Christian versions. We'll explore why Loki, the god of mischief, later became associated with the devil, and how Christianity changed many parts of the Norse stories. We'll talk about the two Viking kings who forcefully converted their people to Christianity. The percentage of Viking DNA that survives in the modern world. And how historical evidence and archaeology reveal what truly happened to the Viking religion. And don't worry, this video is not going to be a boring, essay-style lecture. I've divided everything into clear chapters so it's easy to understand and enjoyable to watch. Each chapter focuses on one simple idea at a time, so you can follow the entire story without any confusion. For most of Viking history, Norse mythology lived only in spoken words. The stories of Odin, Thor, Freya, and Loki were passed through memory, poetry, and performance, not through books. There was no official scripture, no single true version, only the living tradition of the people who told the stories. And within that original world, the gods were not divided into holy and sinful the way later religions would frame them. They had flaws, tempers, humor, and contradictions. A god could cause problems in one story and save everyone in the next. This is why, in the original pre-Christian Norse belief, Loki was never a devil. He was a trickster, unpredictable, playful, sometimes dangerous, sometimes helpful. He made trouble, but he also solved impossible problems for the gods. The Vikings saw him as chaotic, not evil. He was part of their world, included in their feasts, and joined the gods on their adventures. Everything changed after Christianity became dominant in Scandinavia. Once the old religion faded, the myths were written down mainly by Christian scholars in medieval Iceland. The most influential writer, Snorri Sturluson, lived in the 13th century, more than 200 years after Christianity had fully taken over. So when he and other Christian writers recorded the old myths, they naturally interpreted them through a Christian worldview, not out of hatred, but because that was the world they understood. This Christian influence slowly reshaped the tone of the myths. Loki's role in Baldur's death, originally a tragic story with complex emotions, began to resemble the Christian idea of a tempter causing the fall of innocence. Loki's punishment underground, bound with a serpent dripping venom, started to sound similar to the devil being chained in darkness in Christian writings. And even the Norse afterlife changed in description. The original Viking afterlife realm, Helheim, ruled by the goddess Hel, was not a place of fire or torture. It was simply where most ordinary people went after death, a cold, quiet, neutral land. But over time, medieval Christian writers began describing it in ways that resembled the Christian hell, even though the two concepts were never meant to be the same. These shifts do not prove an intentional conspiracy to demonize Norse gods. Instead, they show how myths naturally evolve when retold by people with different beliefs. A Christian author sees chaos and interprets it as evil. A neutral underworld becomes similar to the hell he already understands. An end-of-the-world prophecy like Ragnarok begins to resemble the Christian apocalypse because that structure is familiar. So the Norse mythology we read today is a blend, half ancient oral tradition, half Christian era interpretation. The core survives, but many details, tones, and character portrayals, especially Loki's, changed over the centuries. Understanding this difference is essential. Separating pre-Christian Norse beliefs from post-Christian written interpretations gives us a clearer picture of how the Vikings truly saw their gods, their world, and the forces shaping their lives. Ragnarok is one of the most dramatic concepts in Norse mythology, a final battle where gods, giants, monsters, and the forces of nature clash and destroy the world. But to understand what Ragnarok truly meant to the Vikings, we need to separate two things: the original, pre-Christian Norse idea, and the version later shaped and written down by Christian scholars. In the oldest Viking belief, Ragnarok was not a past event or something that had already happened. It was a prophecy of the future, a fate even the gods themselves could not escape. The Vikings didn't believe the world would end because of sin or moral failure. In their view, the universe simply moved in cycles of creation and destruction. Even powerful gods like Odin, Thor, and Frey were temporary. Nothing in their world was eternal. This belief shaped the Viking mindset. They imagined the final battle as a cosmic test of courage, not a punishment, not a judgment, but a destiny. Every warrior hoped to die bravely so they could join Odin in Valhalla, the hall where fallen warriors trained every day. Why? Because they believed that at Ragnarok, Odin would call on them to fight against giants, monsters, and the fire god Surtur. The Vikings trained, fought, and cultivated fearlessness because they thought they were preparing for the last war, a war that even the gods expected to lose. This explains why Vikings were not afraid of death. Dying in battle wasn't a tragedy, it was a privilege. It meant being chosen by the Valkyries, joining Odin's elite, and standing beside the gods when the world burned and was reborn. This idea of a heroic last stand was central to their worldview long before Christianity arrived. But when Christianity spread through Scandinavia, the interpretation of Ragnarok changed. Christian writers who recorded the myths in the 12th and 13th centuries saw the Norse apocalypse through their own beliefs. To them, an end-of-the-world story naturally resembled the Christian Judgment Day. So the written versions began to emphasize fire, destruction, moral downfall, and cosmic punishment, elements common in Christian apocalyptic stories. For example, the original Viking prophecies didn't describe Ragnarok as a divine punishment for evil. But Christian-era writers sometimes framed it that way, consciously or unconsciously. They also highlighted the survival of a chosen few after the destruction, which mirrors the Christian theme of renewal after judgment. Another major reinterpretation involved Loki. In the pre-Christian view, Loki wasn't the devil of Ragnarok. He did fight against the gods in the final battle, but the Vikings didn't see this as a moral betrayal. It was simply his destiny as a chaotic being. After Christian influence, however, Loki's role in Ragnarok became more devilish, more like a leader of evil forces, something very different from the original belief. This explains why Vikings were not afraid of death. Dying in battle wasn't a tragedy, it was a privilege. It meant being chosen by the Valkyries, joining Odin's elite, and standing beside the gods when the world burned and was reborn. This idea of a heroic last stand was central to their worldview long before Christianity arrived. But when Christianity spread through Scandinavia, the interpretation of Ragnarok changed. Christian writers who recorded the myths in the 12th and 13th centuries saw the Norse apocalypse through their own beliefs. To them, an end-of-the-world story naturally resembled the Christian Judgment Day. So the written versions began to emphasize fire, destruction, moral downfall, and cosmic punishment, elements common in Christian apocalyptic stories. For example, the original Viking prophecies didn't describe Ragnarok as a divine punishment for evil. But Christian-era writers sometimes framed it that way, consciously or unconsciously. They also highlighted the survival of a chosen few after the destruction, which mirrors the Christian theme of renewal after judgment. Yet, the core Viking idea remains unmistakable. Ragnarok is a future event, a prophecy, a cosmic fate that even the gods cannot avoid. It was never believed to have already happened, and it was not a historical event. It was the ultimate symbol of the Viking worldview, that courage is meaningful even when defeat is certain, and that honor comes from fighting for something greater than yourself, even when you know the end is coming. So when we talk about Ragnarok today, we are looking at two layers of history: the raw, original Viking prophecy of fate and renewal, and the later, Christian-influenced written version that added moral and apocalyptic tones. Understanding the difference helps us see how the Vikings truly lived, fought, and imagined their place in the universe. When most people imagine Vikings, they picture huge, wild warriors with horned helmets, giant beards, and dirty faces. But archaeology tells us something very different. To understand who the Vikings really were, we need to look at their bodies, their faces, their clothes, their daily lives, and the physical evidence left behind in graves, ships, tools, and even DNA. First, the appearance. Vikings were not a single race. They came from different parts of Scandinavia, meaning their features varied. Many were tall for their time, around 5 feet 7 inches to 5 feet 9 inches on average, but not the giants pop culture shows. Some were muscular, especially warriors and laborers, but farmers, traders, and craftsmen had more normal builds. Their facial features were sharp, with strong jawlines, high cheekbones, and deep-set eyes. But the most surprising finding comes from DNA. Vikings were not all blonde. In fact, many had brown or even black hair. Only people from certain regions of Scandinavia had light blonde hair naturally. Their eyes were a mix too: blue, gray, green, and brown, not just blue. Next, the hair and beard style. Far from being wild and messy, Vikings were obsessed with grooming. Archaeologists have found thousands of combs, razors, tweezers, nail cleaners, and even ear spoons. Men kept their beards clean and shaped, while women braided their hair carefully, sometimes using ribbons or beads. Cleanliness was so important that English writers in the 11th century complained that Viking men bathed too often and stole the women because of their good looks. This shows that Vikings actually had a reputation for being attractive and well-groomed, not barbaric. Then, the clothing. Vikings didn't dress in animal skins like movies show. They wore layered wool, linen, and sometimes silk if they could afford it. Men wore tunics, trousers, cloaks, and leather belts. Women wore long dresses, undershifts, and apron dresses held by metal brooches. The brooches found in graves help us date and understand their fashion. Rich Vikings used colorful dyes, blue, red, yellow, green, and even imported silk from the east. Their clothes were practical but stylish, and their jewelry showed social status. Their houses and lifestyle also paint a different picture. A Viking household was usually a longhouse made of wood, turf, or stone, depending on the region. Inside, families, workers, and sometimes animals lived together. Contrary to the savage barbarian stereotype, Vikings were skilled farmers. They raised cattle, sheep, goats, pigs, and horses. They grew wheat, barley, oats, and vegetables. Most Vikings were not warriors, they were farmers who fought when necessary. Their behavior and culture were complex. Vikings could be violent raiders, but they were also traders, explorers, craftsmen, and settlers. In fact, archaeology shows far more peaceful settlements than battle sites. Viking culture valued honor, loyalty, hospitality, and family bonds. They had laws, courts, and assemblies called the Thing, where disputes were settled democratically. They weren't mindless destroyers, they were a society with rules, religion, art, and long-distance trade. Grave findings also reveal that women held significant status. Many were buried with jewelry, household tools, and sometimes weapons, suggesting they had important roles in society. Children were treated with care, and burial customs show strong emotional and spiritual beliefs. One of the most surprising discoveries from DNA studies is that many Vikings had mixed ancestry. In some regions, especially in the British Isles, Viking burials show people with both Scandinavian and local British roots. This proves that Vikings intermarried, adopted local cultures, and became part of the population wherever they settled. So when we remove the fantasy and Hollywood stereotypes, the real Viking looks completely different. They were clean, well-dressed, physically varied, culturally rich, and deeply organized. They were not just raiders, they were farmers, sailors, traders, explorers, and creators of one of the most influential cultures in European history. This is the real Viking mask, not the monstrous image, but a balanced, human, historically accurate civilization built through archaeology, DNA, and real evidence. Before Christianity, Scandinavia followed a complex web of traditions, gods, and local rituals. There was no single Viking religion, each region had its own customs. But between the 900s and early 1100s, everything changed. Norse paganism didn't collapse overnight. It was pushed, negotiated, bought, and sometimes brutally forced into extinction. And the biggest turning points came from two powerful leaders, Harald Bluetooth and Olaf Tryggvason. Christianity's arrival in the north was not peaceful. It came with political pressure, military threats, forced baptisms, economic rewards, destruction of sacred sites, and punishments for those who refused to convert. Let's break down how this transformation actually happened. Archaeological evidence shows that before conversion, Viking worship centered on sacred groves, animal sacrifices, wooden idols, and occasional temples like the famous one at Uppsala Temple. But between the 900s and 1100s, these sites begin to disappear from the archaeological record, replaced by crosses, churches, and Christian graveyards. This shift didn't happen naturally. Someone pushed it. One of the first major enforcers of Christianity was Harald Bluetooth, King of Denmark. According to runestones and written sources, Harald announced that he made the Danes Christian. But he didn't do it through preaching, he did it through power. Harald used Christianity to strengthen his rule, gain alliances with the Holy Roman Empire, and unify Denmark under one religion. He destroyed pagan sites and replaced them with churches. He ordered mass baptisms. And if a local chieftain refused, their political power was taken away. But in Norway, conversion was far harsher. Olaf Tryggvason is remembered as the most aggressive Christianizer in Scandinavian history. Written sources say he gave people only two choices, baptism or death. Entire villages were forced into rivers to be baptized. Pagan priests were executed. Sacred idols of Odin and Thor were burned or chopped apart in public to humiliate the old gods. And when chieftains resisted, Olaf destroyed their lands, took away their property, or forced them to swear loyalty under Christian law. Another king, Olaf II Haraldsson, continued this process. He passed strict laws that punished any form of pagan practice, even small rituals like leaving food for household spirits. People who secretly kept Norse traditions could be fined, exiled, or executed. His extreme enforcement is one reason he later became a Christian saint. But not all conversion was done with violence. Bribes and benefits also played a major role. Archaeological finds reveal that Christian bishops often offered silver, weapons, luxurious clothing, and even political support to local Viking leaders in exchange for converting. In many places, a chieftain would convert first, and then force everyone under him to follow. Christianity offered political stability, trade opportunities with Christian Europe, and access to powerful allies. Many Vikings accepted it not because they believed, but because it was useful. Missionaries also spread across Scandinavia, building churches next to old pagan sites so people would gradually shift their rituals. Christian graveyards replaced burial mounds. Wooden idols were removed and replaced with crosses. And Christian scribes rewrote Norse myths to fit their worldview, turning Loki into a Satan-like figure and making the gods seem weaker or more flawed. By the 1100s, the transformation was complete. Not because people willingly abandoned Odin, but because kings enforced a new system. Because trade demanded it. Because political survival required it. And because Christianity slowly replaced every part of daily life, from laws and leadership to funerals and festivals. The conversion of the Vikings wasn't a peaceful religious evolution. It was a cultural takeover, one built on power, pressure, negotiation, and sometimes fear. And it forever changed the identity of the North. After the long and often violent process of Christianization, the Viking world entered a completely new chapter. Their gods had been replaced. Their rituals had been outlawed. And their kings now ruled under the symbol of the cross. But what happened next? How did the Norse people respond? And what did this new religious identity mean for their future? The aftermath of conversion wasn't simple. The Vikings didn't wake up one morning feeling peaceful or united under a new faith. For many, Christianity was something they accepted on the outside, while still holding on to their old beliefs in private. Archaeologists have found graves from the 900s and 1000s where Christian crosses were placed beside Thor's hammer pendants. This shows that people were unsure, caught between two worlds. Some feared losing the old gods. Others saw conversion as a chance for a more stable life. Emotionally, many Vikings were conflicted. The sagas describe people feeling sadness, anger, and even guilt when sacred idols were destroyed or temples were burned. But at the same time, Christianity brought benefits that paganism never offered: peace treaties, trade opportunities, political alliances, and social advancement. So while some mourned the loss of their old identity, others embraced the change because it improved their lives. Politically, everything shifted. Once the kings converted, they gained support from powerful Christian rulers in Europe. Kingdom of England began forming stronger ties with Scandinavian rulers. Christian kings in Norway and Denmark started conducting diplomacy with Holy Roman Empire, which offered recognition, trade rights, and military backing. Aligning with Christian Europe turned Viking leaders from feared raiders into accepted monarchs. For example, after conversion, Sven Forkbeard became closely involved with English politics, eventually ruling over England itself. This would have been unimaginable for a pagan king. Christianity allowed Vikings to gain crowns beyond their homeland. Relations with Christian kingdoms also changed dramatically. Instead of constant raids, there were treaties, marriages, and alliances. Viking leaders sent their sons to be educated at Christian courts. Christian monks traveled to Scandinavia to teach reading, writing, and law. The Norse legal system slowly began to resemble Christian law, replacing blood feuds with courts and compensation payments. But beneath all this political progress, a cultural struggle continued. Many old traditions survived in secret. People still honored ancestors, told stories of Odin and Thor, and celebrated seasonal festivals that Christianity later absorbed. Some rural areas held on to pagan beliefs for centuries. Christianity didn't erase Viking identity, it reshaped it. By the 1100s, the transformation was complete. The Norse world had moved from warriors of the old gods to Christian kingdoms connected to Europe. Their ships no longer crossed the seas for raiding, but for trade and diplomacy. Their kings now wore crowns blessed by bishops, not weapons blessed by pagan priests. Yet the spirit of the Vikings never fully disappeared. Their courage, their exploration, their storytelling, and their pride lived on, even under the new religion. After the cross came the crown, and Scandinavia emerged not as a destroyed culture, but as a transformed civilization, walking into a new future while still carrying shadows of its ancient past. Even though the Viking Age ended nearly 1,000 years ago, the Vikings themselves never truly disappeared. Their ships stopped sailing. Their temples fell silent. But their genes, the blood of the warriors, continued to flow through millions of people around the world. So the question is, how much Viking DNA survives today, and where can we find their descendants? Modern science has finally given us answers. Huge DNA studies, especially those conducted by University of Copenhagen and Wellcome Sanger Institute, analyzed thousands of Viking Age skeletons and compared them with the genomes of modern populations. What they discovered was surprising. Vikings were genetically diverse, and their DNA spread far beyond Scandinavia. Today, the highest percentage of Viking ancestry is found in Iceland, where around 60 to 70% of male ancestry and over 35% of female ancestry trace back to Norse settlers. This makes Iceland one of the strongest living Viking descendant populations. In Norway, Sweden, and Denmark, people still carry between 30 to 40% Viking Age genetic signatures, mainly in the Y chromosome lines, the genetic markers passed from father to son. But Viking DNA isn't limited to Scandinavia. It traveled everywhere the Vikings explored, raided, traded, or settled. In United Kingdom, especially in regions once part of the Danelaw, such as Yorkshire, Orkney, Shetland, and parts of Scotland, studies show that up to 20 to 25% of the population carries Scandinavian ancestry. In Orkney and Shetland, the percentage climbs even higher due to heavy Viking settlement. Ireland also shows Viking influence. In cities founded by Norse settlers, like Dublin, the population carries 5 to 10% Norse ancestry, especially through paternal lines. Even France, particularly Normandy, has Viking DNA. Normandy literally means land of the Northmen. The famous Norman ruler William the Conqueror himself descended from Viking settlers. Although modern Normans have mostly mixed with French populations, some Norse genetic traces remain. The genetic influence spreads even further. Small but measurable traces of Viking ancestry exist in Russia, Poland, Ukraine, and the Baltic regions, due to trade routes and settlements of the Varangians, Norse explorers who traveled deep into Eastern Europe. Outside Europe, millions of people claim Viking ancestry through later migrations. Norwegians, Danes, and Swedes who moved to United States, Canada, and Australia carried Norse genetic lines to the modern world. It's estimated that tens of millions of people globally may have small percentages of Viking ancestry. But the most fascinating discovery from genetic studies is this. Vikings were not one single race or uniform-looking group. DNA analysis of ancient remains shows individuals with brown hair, black hair, blonde hair, light eyes, dark eyes, proving that the Viking world was genetically mixed long before modern migration. Their DNA reveals connections with the British Isles, Southern Europe, and even the Baltic and Slavic regions. So where are the Vikings now? They are not gone. They live on in millions of people across Scandinavia, the UK, Ireland, France, Eastern Europe, and the entire Western world. Their culture faded, their gods were replaced, but their blood never vanished. Inside modern populations, fragments of Viking identities still survive, carried silently through the centuries, generation after generation. The warriors disappeared, but their legacy, their blood, remained. And now we reach the final chapter, the turning point of history. The moment where everything we learn comes together. The story of the Vikings is not just a story of warriors, raids, and longships. It is the story of a culture that evolved, collided with new ideas, and eventually transformed. We began by looking at the two faces of Norse mythology, the pre-Christian world where gods like Loki were unpredictable and mischievous, and the post-Christian world where writers reshaped the myths through a Christian worldview. We explored Ragnarok, the great war of the future, not as a past event, but as a prophecy, a symbolic reminder of how Vikings saw honor, death, and destiny. Their belief in dying with courage shaped their entire lifestyle. Then we removed the Hollywood mask and looked at what Vikings truly were, not horned helmet monsters, but farmers, traders, sailors, and explorers with diverse looks and practical clothing, proven by archaeology and historical records. We uncovered the reasons behind their conversion to Christianity: political pressure, economic survival, social advantage, and the forceful actions of certain kings. Their conversion wasn't sudden, nor peaceful, nor purely spiritual. It was a complex process shaped by power, fear, opportunity, and survival. We saw what happened after that conversion, how the Norse identity slowly blended into the Christian North, how their old temples fell, and how their new alliances changed the entire political map of Europe. And finally, we learned that Vikings did not disappear. Their blood still flows across millions of people today. Their genes, their stories, and their cultural influence live inside the modern world, in languages, traditions, place names, and even family DNA. So the real turning point of history was not the end of the Vikings. It was their transformation. A transformation that reshaped religion, politics, culture, and the genetic map of the Western world. The Viking Age ended, but the Vikings never truly died.